Hey everybody, this is a piece from The Fate of the Russian Revolution, Lost Texts of Critical Marxism, edited by Sean Matgamna. This piece is titled After the Stalinist Invasion of Poland, and I'm not really quite sure what it is, like what its format is, but I'll just read and hopefully it'll all come together. It says, Albert Goldman, James Burnham, James Buchanan, Motions of Socialist Workers' Party Political Committee, Special Club Executive, Socialist Workers' Party Committee meeting, September 18th, 1939. Present, Drake, George Brightman, Erickson, Ernest Erber, Wilson, B.J. Wittick, Levine, Anton, Nathan Gould, Walsh, Joseph Carter, Stewart, Sam Gordon, Morris, Albert Goldman, Kelvin, James Burnham, Michaels, Max Shachtman, Charnas, Paul Bernick, Martin, James Buchanan, Stern, Morris Lewitt, White, Burt Cochran, by invitation, Cohen, C.L.R. James. I believe C.L.R. James would have just been coming to the United States at this time. He was originally operating in the British Trotskyist world. Next issue of Paper and War in Poland. Motions by Kelvin, or James Burnham. 1. Through its invasion of Poland, the Red Army is participating integrally in a war of imperialist conquest. 2. This estimated the character of the war shall govern the news articles and editorials in our press. 3. Prior to the plenum of the more general questions concerning the nature of the Russian state and the defense of the Soviet Union shall not be dealt with, but a statement of the committee shall be published to the effect that these are under discussion and consideration with the aim of arriving at the speediest possible decision. 4. Kelvin, Michaels, Walsh. Against, Drake, Levine, White, Morris, Stewart, Stern, Martin. Abstaining, Wilson, Erickson, Anton, Charnas. Motion lost. Motions by Morris. And who's Morris again? Albert Goldman. One, the party press, in its handling of Russia's participation in the war in Poland, shall do so from the point of view of the party's fundamental analysis of the character of the Soviet state and the role of Stalinism as laid down in the fundamental resolution of the party's Foundation Convention and the Foundation Congress of the Fourth International. 2. The slogan of an independent Soviet Ukraine shall be defended as a policy wholly consistent with the fundamental line of defending the Soviet Union. 4. Morris, Stewart, Wilson, Anton, Levine, Erickson, Stern, Drake, and Martin. Against, Walsh, Kelvin. Abstaining, Michaels and Charnas. Motion carried. There's another thing. I'm just going to keep reading because this is... I'm not going to put up a video that's 1 minute long. It's just a waste of time. So I'm going to condense some of these, I guess. These are appendices in this section of the book. Quote, a counter-revolutionary imperialist worker state, end quote, for the consideration of the political committee by Cohen, or C.L.R. James. September 26, 1939. 1. I draw the attention of the PC to the fact that at the last convention I raised the question of the, quote, nature of the Soviet state, end quote. I propose that a discussion be initiated because of the obvious design of the Soviet state to establish, quote, protectorates over the Balkan states. It is necessary to emphasize that the reconsideration of this question was raised before the Russo-German Pact. 2. For a Fourth Internationalist, the Russo-German Pact marks no particularly shameful, quote, betrayal any more than a sudden retreat by Stalin from the German to the Anglo-French alliance would mark any regeneration. Such tendencies in our movement should be sternly opposed. This does not mean that the sentiment of disillusionment in the ranks should not be utilized in our press and propaganda, but it does mean that no abnormal political conclusions can be drawn from the mere signing of this pact. 3. The pact, however, does emphasize the direction in which the Soviet state was headed during the earlier negotiations with France and Britain. It is my opinion that the Soviet state has now uncontestably reached a stage of political degeneration in which its foreign policy is indistinguishable from that of an imperialist state, and that it is prepared to conclude not only binding alliances with imperialist states, but in peace or war, will share in any partition of Poland and the allotment of spheres of influence in Eastern Europe or the Baltic states. In my opinion, it would be a grievous error to entertain any illusions as to the action of the Soviet state, if presented with any opportunities of this kind, and such action is of greater importance than breaches in the monopoly of foreign trade, which may well be of a substantial character without causing any fundamental change in the present Soviet economy. If we persist in the denomination of the Soviet Union as a, quote, worker state, then we shall have added to Marxism a new category, the counter-revolutionary imperialist worker state. To object that imperialism is the outgrowth of capitalism and therefore inapplicable in this instance is to make of the classical Marxist terminology not a starting point for the analysis and classification of new phenomena, but a hindrance for those who attempt such investigations. I shall not argue about what name is to be given to the forcible subjection of a people by arms, police, and GPU of the Soviet state. A definition more precise than imperialism may be found. The fact would remain. I submit that to continue to call workers' state any government from which action of that sort is not only possible but probable is to use terms which are devoid of political meaning and fraught with an increasing danger to our movement. 4. This, with the allied question of the defense of the Soviet Union, is no longer a matter of abstract theory, but an urgent question of immediate practical importance. A. For comrades in Europe and Poland particularly may break their necks on this question. B. For great numbers of the workers, this question henceforth becomes one of the most urgent interests, though they may not be able to formulate clearly their wish for clarification. 4. I therefore propose to the Political Committee that in view of the difficulties created for our International Secretariat by the international situation, the discussion proposed at the PC Tuesday take the following course. A. Our international sections be notified immediately and urged to participate. B. That the discussion should not take a discursive, meandering course, but that some reasonable limit should be imposed for the formal presentation of different points of view. C. That at some convenient time, formal resolutions should come before a joint meeting of the National Committee, available members of the International Secretariat, and members of the Pan-American Bureau, all with voice and vote, and that this body make such recommendations in regard to reaffirmation, modification, or repudiation of our position as may be demanded by the international situation. Such recommendations to deal with 1. The nature of the Soviet state, 2. The defense of the Soviet Union. 4. It is regrettable that such a discussion should apparently be initiated by the signing of the Russo-German Pact. It is more regrettable that it should be necessary at this time. But the plain fact remains that our movement, united on all other fundamental questions, is today seriously disturbed by our relation to the Soviet state and its effect on our struggle in the coming war. And a discussion, firm and precise, is needed if we are not to go into the hard conditions of illegality, hesitant and doubtful on a question as decisive for the fate of the working class as it is for our cohesion and morale. And here's a piece from the appendix titled Minority Resolution, September 28, 1939. Resolution on the Soviet Union in the present war, drafted by Max Shachtman, from Socialist Workers' Party Internal Bulletin, October 10, 1939. The party has thus far failed to give a clear-cut and unambiguous answer to the questions raised by Stalin's invasion of Poland. The result has been a serious weakening of the effectiveness of our press, a disorientation of the party membership, and a corresponding reduction of our striking power against the American Stalinist machine and against the social democratic and imperialist patriotic forces who seek to exploit the events for their own reactionary ends, and who can be counteracted most successfully only by an unequivocal revolutionary position on our part. This is all the more urgent in the view of the Estonian events and the prospective extension of Stalin's invasion to other Baltic and to the Balkan countries. The new questions raised cannot be and are not answered by a mere reiteration of the quote, reiteration that quote, the Soviet Union is a worker state, end quote, and that quote, we stand for the unconditional defense of the Soviet Union, end quote. The idea that these declarations provide an automatic reply to the concrete questions posed by the concrete military and political actions taken by Stalin is absurd, and has been proven absurd in practice. Without raising at this time the problem of the class nature of the Soviet state, it is necessary to give immediate powers to the concrete questions raised by the Hitler-Stalin Pact, the ensuing conquest of Poland and matters related thereto. Considered abstractly, the Hitler-Stalin Pact stands on the same level as the Franco-Soviet Pact, and revolutionary Marxists have only contempt for the popular frontists and patriots of all stripes who endorsed the latter because it was made with democratic imperialists, and condemn the former because it was made with Nazi imperialism. For our part, we reject and condemn both, without forsaking our basic position, which recognizes the admissibility of temporary agreements between a Soviet state and a bourgeois state. Considered concretely, however, the Hitler-Stalin Pact has meant the following, which was in general only potentially contained in the Franco-Soviet Pact. 1. Stalin gave Hitler the signal for opening up the Second Imperialist War and linked his fortunes with those of the Nazi war machine. 2. Stalin gave Hitler the signal for the brutal Nazi invasion of Poland. 3. Stalin not only facilitated this imperialist invasion politically and militarily, but jointly divided the spoils with the triumphant Nazis. The party must sternly reject any attempt made inside or outside its ranks, to, quote, explain away, end quote, to justify or to condone the Stalinist invasion of Poland and its partition in partnership with Hitler. The party must reject the essentially capitulatory standpoint summarized in the formula, quote, as between Hitler and Stalin, the Poles choose Stalin, end quote. We deny that the choice of the multinational masses of Poland is limited to the rule of the Hitlerite bandits or the Kremlin slave drivers. The Fourth International calls upon the masses of Poland to fight against both of them as well as against the Polish ruling class. For a socialist Poland and for the united, independent Soviet republics of the Ukraine and of White Russia. The party also rejects the standpoint which, under the guise of a, quote, objective explanation, and in name of the, quote, defense of the Soviet Union, makes the Stalinist invasion a matter of indifference to the masses of Poland or relegates it to the category of purely military tactical considerations of the Red Army. It is not a question of military science but a political question, and it must be dealt with accordingly. The party condemns the Stalinist invasion and the subjugation of Poland as acts of imperialist policy, regardless of the illusions the Kremlin gang may feed the masses, or itself for that matter. It is acting as the agent of German imperialism, just as it was ready to act as agent of Anglo-French imperialism yesterday, and may act as such tomorrow, produced by the same cause. German fascism and Stalinist bureaucratism are now engaged in a joint campaign of imperialist expansion. The party must denounce the monstrous claims of the Stalinists that the Red Army is, quote, liberating the Ukrainian, White Russian, and Polish people, just as it denounced the earlier Stalinist claim that the Polish masses would be fighting for democracy and freedom against fascism by supporting the ruling class of Poland and its regime. The war in Poland shows, to an infinitely greater and clearer extent than the civil war in Spain, the utterly counter-revolutionary role played by the Stalinist bureaucracy. While we were not and could not be for the defense of, quote, poor little Poland, end quote, the imperialist Poland of yesterday, we recognize in the patriotism and the hatred of Hitlerism shown by the Polish masses something potentially progressive. With the inevitable collapse and flight of the rotten Polish military landowning clique and its government, aroused the possibility of a revolutionary defense of Poland. If not a Polish October immediately, then an October reached after a Polish, quote, February. In the chaos attending the collapse of the Polish Imperial Army, signs of such a possibility already could be discerned in parts of the country. Instead of helping in any way, even to the tiny extent to which it was done in Spain, where at least one Soviet rifle out of 10 might be counted on to fire at Franco, to materialize this possibility, i.e., to promote an independent class war against the Nazi invader. Stalin wiped out this possibility completely in partnership with that invader. Stalin and the Red Army thus played a flatly counter-revolutionary role in Poland. The bitter realities of the recent events, most particularly of the events in Poland, dictate a revision of our previous concepts of the, quote, unconditional defense of the Soviet Union, end quote. As understood by our movement, this concept meant not only that we call for the defense of the Soviet Union, even if it is directed by the Stalinist bureaucracy, but also that we support the Red Army in any military struggle in which it engages, that we are for its victory under all circumstances, be it a so-called, quote, defensive or, quote, aggressive war. To be true to its revolutionary internationalist role, the Fourth International must now call upon the Polish workers and peasants to rise in revolutionary struggle and, with their own armed forces, drive out the oppressors of the people, Hitler in one half of the country and the Stalinist bureaucracy in the other. The same applies in similar situations elsewhere. This means a struggle both against the Reichswehr and against the Red Army. In this struggle, the revolutionary internationalists cannot and will not be for the victory of the Red Army, which the Stalinist bureaucracy is compelled to act as an agent of imperialism and an oppressor of the people. Instead, the Fourth International will call upon the workers and peasants of the Soviet Union, those in the Red Army included, to help their revolutionary brothers in Poland, just as we call on them to help fight for the establishment of an independent Soviet Ukraine, and to overthrow the Stalinist bureaucracy and its reactionary officer corps at home. From this position, the only one compatible with the revolutionary interests of the international proletariat, as well as of both the Polish and Soviet masses, does not necessarily follow the abandonment of the slogan of the defense of the Soviet Union. The collapse of the Franco-Soviet pact demonstrated once more the fragility and temporariness of alliances between the Soviet Union and the capitalist states. It is quite impossible, even probable, that the Hitler-Stalin pact will last an even shorter time. All of Stalin's hopes and ruses to the contrary notwithstanding, a change in the character of the war to direct imperialist attack upon the Soviet Union by one or more states is not at all excluded. Assuming that the bourgeois counter-revolution, which is now on the order of the day in the Soviet Union, has not triumphed, and defense of the Soviet Union, even under the rule of the bureaucracy, will again become an immediate and paramount task. In other words, just as wars of national liberation can change into imperialist wars and vice versa, and imperialist wars into revolutionary wars, so we cannot exclude the possibility of the present imperialist war turning into a war of intervention in the Soviet Union. The party cannot adopt a position which may result in new events catching it unawares, and it must therefore envisage the possibility of a radical change in the decisive nature of the present war and in the position occupied by the Soviet Union. It is necessary to submit these questions immediately to the discussion of the party membership and of the International in a sober, orderly, and responsible manner. There is no other way of arriving at a firm and clear revolutionary position, thus enabling us to discharge the enormous responsibilities faced today by the Fourth International. And finally, from the appendix, National Committee Plenum, September 30th to October 31st, 1939. Motions on the Russian question. From the Socialist Workers' Party Internal Bulletin, October 10th, 1939. The following motions were adopted by the Plenum of the National Committee, meeting on September 30th and October 1st, 1939. 1. That we reaffirm the basic analysis of the nature of the Soviet state and the role of Stalinism and the political conclusions drawn from this analysis, including the unconditional defense of the Soviet Union against imperialist attack as laid down in the previous decisions of our party convention and in the program of the Fourth International. 2. The Plenum endorses the political conclusions of the document of Trotsky on the USSR in war and instructs the political committee to publish this document as an evaluation and elucidation of the new events on the basis of our fundamental position. The USSR in war is on this channel. And the final appendix. the expulsion of the minority. Minutes of the club executive, Socialist Workers' Party Committee, 2nd of November, number 2, April 16th, 1940. Club exec. Members present: Martin, James P. Cannon, Stern, Morris Lewitt, White, Burt Cochran, Stewart, Sam Gordon, Smith, Farrell Dobbs, Rand, George Clark, Late, Stone, Martin Aburn, Michaels, Max Shachtman. Club exec. Members absent: Kelvin, James Burnham, Charnas, Paul Bernick. Club members present: Dorn, Murray Weiss, Drake, George Brightman, Cassidy, Felix Morrow, Jode, Joseph Hansen, Wilson, B.J. Wittick, Erickson, Ernest Erber, Walsh, Joseph Carter, Anton, Nathan Gould. Present by invitation: Williams, Oscar Schoenfeld, George Novak, Manny. Chairman: Stern, Lewitt. Party situation. Motion by Martin, that the committee accepts the convention decisions and obligates itself to carry them out in a disciplined manner. Vote on motion. For Rand: Smith, Martin, Stern, Cassidy, Dorn, Drake, Stewart, White. Abstaining: Stone, Michaels, Wilson, Walsh, Anton, Erickson. Motion carried. Motion by Martin. Those members of the club executive and club NC who abstain from voting on this motion stand suspended from the party and from all party functions, including the function as agents of the party and the New International Publishing Company and Socialist Appeal Publishing Association, until such time as they have indicated to the satisfaction of the committee their intention to comply with convention decisions. Question by Michaels, who's again Max Shachtman. By what authority can this motion be made? Answer by Martin. And Martin is James P. Cannon. By the constitution of the party as amended by the last party convention. Vote on motion. For Rand, Smith, Martin, Stern, Cassidy, Dorn, Drake, Stewart, White. Against: Stone, Michaels, Walsh, Anton, Erickson. Motion carried. The minority members were thereby suspended and retired from the meeting. Okay, the end. Thanks for listening. I don't know how I'm going to label this video once it goes up, but thank you for bearing with me.